In 1994, South Carolina became the epicenter of one of the most shocking crimes in American history. On October 25th, a desperate mother, Susan Smith, called the police in Union, reporting a horrific crime. She claimed she had been carjacked at gunpoint by a black man at a red light. Inside her vehicle were her 2 young sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alexander. Within minutes, the story spread across the community. A frantic mother, 2 missing children, a faceless suspect described in chilling detail. The nation was hooked. Vigils began almost immediately, yellow ribbons tied around lampposts. Volunteers searched wooded areas, rivers, and highways. Television cameras rolled as Susan stood before the public, weeping, begging for her babies to come home. "I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't think of anything but my children," she said, her voice breaking. For 9 days, America believed her. The story seemed tragically familiar. An innocent family, random violence, and a desperate mother caught in the middle. But beneath the tears, police were growing suspicious. From the beginning, investigators noted inconsistencies in Susan's account. Her description of the alleged carjacker was vague. The location she provided didn't add up. The timing of her story shifted under scrutiny. Detectives pressed harder, but Susan clung to her narrative. She insisted a stranger had taken her sons and vanished into the night. As days turned into a week, the pressure mounted. The FBI joined the search. Composite sketches of the so-called suspect were circulated nationwide. African-American men in Union County were stopped, questioned, and eyed with suspicion. The racial undertones of Susan's accusation fueled fear and tension. Innocent men felt the weight of her lie, and yet no trace of the children appeared. The public image of Susan Smith became a tragic paradox. On one hand, she was a mother on television, her face streaked with tears, appearing shattered. On the other, investigators whispered that something darker lurked beneath. Detectives soon uncovered details about her personal life that painted a disturbing picture. Susan was recently divorced and involved with a man named Tom Findlay, the wealthy son of her former employer. Their relationship had been volatile, filled with passion, rejection, and despair. When Tom broke things off, he made his reasons brutally clear. He did not want children. For Susan, that rejection cut deep. She confided to friends about her heartbreak. She spoke of her loneliness, of feeling unwanted. What no one realized was how far her despair would spiral. On November 3rd, after 9 long days of national coverage, candlelight vigils, and desperate searching, the truth broke. Confronted by investigators with mounting evidence, Susan finally confessed. She admitted there was no carjacker. No mysterious man had stolen her vehicle. Instead, on that October night, Susan had strapped Michael and Alexander into their car seats, driven to John D. Long Lake, and released the handbrake. The Mazda slowly rolled into the dark water, headlights slicing the surface before sinking beneath. Her children were alive as the car submerged, trapped, gasping, drowning in silence. The confession shattered the nation. Reporters rushed to the lake. Crowds gathered, stunned into silence as divers recovered the small bodies. The yellow ribbons, once symbols of hope, now hung like cruel reminders of betrayal. Parents across America held their children tighter. The thought that a mother could orchestrate such a calculated act was unthinkable. Susan's crocodile tears, broadcast into living rooms nationwide, transformed into the most chilling evidence of manipulation. Her trial began in July 1995, drawing international attention. The defense portrayed her as a woman overwhelmed by depression and mental illness, incapable of rational thought. The prosecution argued something darker: selfishness, rejection, and murder. They painted Susan as a manipulator who weaponized public sympathy, using racial stereotypes to shield herself. By blaming an imaginary black man, she not only tried to cover her tracks, but also unleashed suspicion and fear upon an entire community. Jurors heard about her obsession with Tom Findlay, about her desperation for his approval. The motive became painfully clear. Her children stood between her and the life she wanted, so she eliminated them. In the courtroom, photographs of Michael and Alexander, smiling and innocent, contrasted against their mother's cold betrayal. Witnesses described her lack of genuine emotion. The jury deliberated for just 2.5 hours before convicting her on 2 counts of murder. On July 22, 1995, Susan Smith was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She avoided the death penalty, but her name became synonymous with maternal betrayal. The impact of her crime extended far beyond Union, South Carolina. Susan's false accusation of a black carjacker reinforced dangerous stereotypes and sparked outrage among civil rights leaders. Innocent men were interrogated and vilified, their lives disrupted by her fabricated story. The case highlighted how easily racial bias could be weaponized to deflect guilt. It left scars not only on the families directly involved, but also on the nation's conscience. Nearly 3 decades later, Susan Smith remains in prison. She has been denied parole, her earliest eligibility set for 2024. Reports from inside suggest a troubled inmate, disciplined for drug use and relationships with prison guards. She continues to insist she was battling severe depression at the time of the crime. But for many, no explanation can ever justify what she did. Michael and Alexander's short lives are remembered in memorials, photographs, and the lingering sorrow of a community that once prayed for their return. Susan Smith's case endures as a haunting reminder of deception, desperation, and the darkest betrayal of trust. A mother who turned love into murder. These stories reveal the darkest betrayal of trust imaginable. If you want to explore more true crime cases, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Let us know in the comments which case shocked you the most. On May 19, 1983, the emergency room at Mackenzie-Willamette Hospital in Springfield, Oregon, erupted in chaos. A blood-soaked car screeched to a halt at the entrance. Inside were 3 children. 7-year-old Cheryl lay motionless, fatally wounded. 8-year-old Christy gasped for air, a bullet tearing through her chest and paralyzing her speech. 3-year-old Danny cried out in agony, his small body torn apart by gunfire that would leave him paralyzed from the waist down. Their mother, Diane Downs, emerged from the vehicle with a wounded arm, crying out that a bushy-haired stranger had ambushed them on a deserted rural road. Doctors fought desperately to save the surviving children. Nurses wept as they tried to comfort Christy, her wide eyes locked in silent terror. The scene was unforgettable, innocence destroyed by calculated violence. Diane herself seemed oddly composed. Her injury was superficial, a grazing wound that barely broke skin, yet she insisted the shooter had targeted her family during an attempted carjacking. Police rushed to secure the supposed crime scene. But something was off. The lack of gunpowder residue on the car doors. No footprints, no evidence of a fleeing suspect. As detectives pressed Diane for details, her story shifted. First, the stranger demanded the car. Then he simply wanted to shoot her. Each retelling unraveled further. Despite the inconsistencies, Diane launched a media campaign. She smiled during interviews. She laughed inappropriately. She reenacted the shooting on camera, her arm jerking in exaggerated motions. The performance stunned the public, who could grin while recalling the night their children were ambushed. Investigators began digging deeper into Diane's life. They uncovered diaries filled with longing and obsession. She had been consumed by an affair with a married man, a colleague named Robert Knickerbocker. He had been clear. He didn't want children. Diane saw her kids not as blessings, but as obstacles to winning his affection. In her twisted logic, eliminating them would clear the path to the future she craved. The strongest evidence came from the smallest survivor. Christy, though gravely injured, slowly regained her ability to speak. Investigators approached with caution, knowing her testimony could shatter the case. Finally, in a hushed courtroom, Christy bravely revealed the truth. It was her own mother who had pulled the trigger. The words echoed like thunder, a daughter condemning her mother for murder. Jurors wept. Diane's behavior only reinforced the image of narcissism and coldness. She arrived at trial visibly pregnant, carrying a child conceived with yet another man during the investigation. Prosecutors argued she had intentionally used her pregnancy to manipulate jurors, to present herself as maternal and incapable of violence. It backfired. Instead, the strategy underscored her selfishness. The trial painted a damning picture. Prosecutors laid out the forensic evidence, the trajectory of the bullets, the absence of a stranger's fingerprints, the chilling diary entries of lust and obsession. Most powerful of all was Christy's testimony, halting and emotional, but devastatingly clear. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days. Diane Downs was convicted of murder, attempted murder, and assault. Her sentence? Life in prison plus 50 years. The judge ensured she would never again be free to harm her children, or anyone else. But Diane's story didn't end there. In 1987, she escaped from prison, slipping out through a window during a recreation period. Panic swept Oregon. Police warned the public she was dangerous and manipulative. For 10 days, she remained on the run, aided by a fellow inmate's husband who believed her claims of innocence. She was recaptured without incident, her escape only reinforcing her chilling disregard for rules and accountability. Behind bars, Diane continued to insist she was framed. She maintained the phantom, bushy-haired stranger was responsible. She wrote letters to reporters and supporters, spinning tales of conspiracy and injustice. Yet no evidence ever emerged to support her claims. Each denial only deepened her image as a woman incapable of remorse. For her surviving children, the scars were lifelong. Christy and Danny were adopted by the lead prosecutor in the case, Fred Hughey, and his wife. They were given new identities and a chance at stability, though the trauma of their mother's betrayal never fully faded. Cheryl, forever 7 years old, remained a haunting absence. Diane Downs became a case study in maternal betrayal. Her smiling interviews, her cold manipulation, her willingness to sacrifice her children for the fleeting promise of romance, all made her one of the most notorious mothers in true crime history. Books were written, documentaries aired, even television dramatizations explored the shocking depths of her crime. Decades later, Diane still resides behind bars in Oregon. She has applied for parole, each time insisting she is innocent. Each time she has been denied, parole boards have cited her lack of remorse, her manipulative tendencies, and her refusal to take responsibility. She remains a danger, even within the confines of prison. Her case endures not simply because of the horror of the crime, but because of the image she presented. Diane Downs did not fit the stereotype of a grieving mother. Instead, she smiled for cameras. She flaunted her pregnancy. She acted as though the entire ordeal was a performance. That disturbing contrast between appearance and reality has kept her name alive in the annals of true crime. For many, the most haunting memory remains Christy's bravery. A little girl, shot and nearly silenced forever, found her voice to testify against the very person who was supposed to protect her. That testimony saved lives. It ensured her mother could never harm again. It transformed tragedy into a powerful act of survival. Diane Downs' story remains one of the darkest tales of parental betrayal in modern history. A woman who chose obsession over motherhood. A mother who became her children's executioner. A name forever tied to manipulation, violence, and lies. These stories reveal the darkest betrayal of trust imaginable. If you want to explore more true crime cases, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Let us know in the comments which case shocked you the most. On June 20th, 2001, in Houston, Texas, Andrea Yates filled the bathtub of her modest home. Inside that bathroom, a crime unfolded that would horrify the world. One by one, she drowned her 5 children. 7-year-old Noah, the eldest, realized what was happening and tried to escape. Andrea chased him, dragged him back, and forced his small body beneath the water. When it was over, she picked up the phone, dialed 911, and told the operator in a flat voice, "I just killed my kids." Unlike other notorious cases of maternal filicide, Andrea's motive wasn't selfishness, lust, or freedom. It was delusion. Andrea Yates was not driven by desire for a lover or hatred of responsibility. She was consumed by religious psychosis. Her downward spiral had begun years earlier. After the birth of her 4th child, Andrea suffered terrifying hallucinations, hearing voices that urged her toward violence. In 1999, she attempted suicide twice and was hospitalized. Doctors diagnosed her with postpartum psychosis, a rare but severe condition that distorts reality after childbirth. Despite these red flags, her husband, Rusty Yates, insisted on having more children, convinced faith and family would heal her. By the time Andrea gave birth to their 5th child, Mary, she was unraveling. She believed Satan himself lived inside her. To Andrea, killing her children was not an act of murder, but one of salvation. She thought drowning them would save their souls from eternal damnation. The aftermath tore the nation apart. Was Andrea Yates a monster who slaughtered 5 innocents? Or was she a profoundly ill woman failed by the medical system, the church, and her family? At her 2002 trial, prosecutors painted her as cold, calculating, and fully aware of her actions. They highlighted how she waited until her husband left for work before committing the killings. Jurors agreed, convicting her of capital murder and sentencing her to life in prison. But doubts soon emerged. The defense appealed, pointing out a critical flaw. One prosecution expert had falsely claimed Andrea watched an episode of Law & Order featuring a mother acquitted for drowning her children, implying premeditation. The episode never existed. This revelation undermined the credibility of the state's case. In 2006, Andrea Yates faced a retrial. This time, her attorneys emphasized her long history of psychiatric collapse, her repeated suicide attempts, her voices, her obsession with sin. Expert witnesses described her as a woman trapped in psychosis, incapable of distinguishing reality from delusion. The jury returned a different verdict, not guilty by reason of insanity. Andrea was committed to Kerrville State Hospital, where she remains to this day. She spends her time painting, medicated, and monitored. She is not free, nor will she ever be. But she is no longer in a prison cell. Her story left permanent scars on America's conscience. The sheer brutality of drowning 5 children in a bathtub etched itself into true crime history. Yet the case also forced the nation to confront uncomfortable questions about mental health, motherhood, and faith. Postpartum psychosis affects only a fraction of mothers, but when untreated, its consequences can be catastrophic. Andrea's doctors had recommended against having more children. Her husband ignored them. The system released her from hospitals too soon. Support collapsed when she needed it most. And 5 children, Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and baby Mary, paid the price. The Yates case remains one of the most disturbing intersections of religion and mental illness. Andrea believed she was protecting her children from Satan. Her faith, twisted by psychosis, turned into the rationale for mass filicide. Even today, her story sparks fierce debate. Was justice served by placing her in a hospital instead of a prison? Should her husband bear responsibility for pushing her beyond her limits? Could more aggressive treatment have prevented the tragedy? For some, Andrea Yates will always be a murderer. For others, she is a victim herself, a woman undone by biology, neglect, and spiritual obsession. The truth perhaps lies somewhere between those extremes. What cannot be debated is the scale of the horror. 5 young lives extinguished in minutes, a bathtub transformed into a grave, a mother whose illness drove her to believe killing was kindness. The legacy of Andrea Yates echoes in mental health reforms, in conversations about postpartum care, and in warnings about the lethal power of untreated psychosis. Hers is a cautionary tale not just about crime, but about the devastating cost of failing to recognize and respond to severe mental illness. Today, in the quiet corridors of Kerrville State Hospital, Andrea Yates lives in obscurity. She paints pictures of children. She avoids television and newspapers. And she remains locked in the shadows of that day in June 2001, when her delusion drowned 5 innocent souls. In Springfield, Missouri, the Stott family appeared to be ordinary. Diane Stott was a church organist, a wife, and the mother of 4. To the outside world, she seemed committed to her family and her faith. But inside her suburban home, resentment was brewing. Diane did not see her husband and children as blessings. She saw them as obstacles, weighing her down and preventing the life she wanted. The nightmare began in April 2012, when Diane's husband, Mark, suddenly died. Friends and doctors believed it was natural causes. He was only 61, but his health had been declining. Diane did not appear devastated. In fact, she seemed relieved, telling acquaintances that Mark had been a burden. Only 3 months later, tragedy struck again. Diane's 26-year-old son, Sean, also died suddenly. Doctors again pointed to natural causes, citing organ failure. The community rallied around Diane, who now appeared as a double victim of cruel fate. But Diane wasn't grieving. She was plotting. Investigators would later uncover that both Mark and Sean had been murdered with antifreeze. Diane had poisoned their drinks slowly, lacing sodas with the sweet-tasting chemical until their bodies shut down. Her motive was chilling in its simplicity. She despised them and wanted them gone. Mark's death freed her from what she described as an unhappy marriage. Sean's death eliminated what she saw as a useless adult child who still lived at home. Diane wasn't finished. In June 2013, her daughter Sarah collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. Doctors were baffled by her failing organs. She lingered near death but survived. A sharp-eyed pastor became suspicious after overhearing Diane make cruel remarks about her family. He contacted police, triggering an investigation. Detectives noticed a disturbing pattern. multiple family members, all with sudden, unexplained illnesses. Toxicology tests revealed ethylene glycol, the active ingredient in antifreeze, in Sarah's system. When confronted, Diane cracked. Her confession was cold, detached, and horrifying. She admitted poisoning her husband, her son, and her daughter. She described Sean as worse than a pest and said she had no regrets. To Diane, the murders were not crimes of passion, but calculated removals of people she considered inconvenient. Even more disturbing, Diane had an accomplice. Her daughter Rachel, the youngest and her favorite, not only knew about the poisonings but actively helped. Rachel assisted in planning the murders and supported the attempt on her sister Sarah's life. Together, mother and daughter plotted a family's destruction, bound not by love, but by shared malice. Investigators pieced together the timeline. Diane bought antifreeze at a local Walmart. She mixed it into sports drinks and soda, exploiting its sweet taste to mask the poison. Victims suffered agonizingly, kidneys failing, body systems shutting down, while Diane remained outwardly calm. She attended church, played the organ, and carried on as though nothing was happening. When the case went to trial, the courtroom heard recordings of Diane's interviews. Her tone was chillingly casual. She admitted Sean's death meant little to her. Mark's death, she said, gave her freedom. Sarah's near death was treated as just another inconvenience. The cold indifference shocked jurors and prosecutors alike. Rachel, facing her own charges, eventually cooperated. She described how her mother despised the family and confided in her about each poisoning. Rachel's testimony secured convictions, but also earned her a lighter sentence. In 2016, Diane Staude was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Rachel received life as well, but with eligibility for parole thanks to her cooperation. Sarah, the daughter who barely survived, was left to live with lifelong health complications caused by the poison coursing through her body. She endured organ damage, memory loss, and the trauma of realizing her own mother had tried to kill her. The Staude case shattered the illusion of the perfect family. Behind closed doors, a mother transformed her home into a house of horrors. Antifreeze, a household chemical meant for cars, became her weapon of choice. The murders were not impulsive but deliberate, calculated, and remorseless. Community members struggled to reconcile the image of Diane, the smiling church organist, with the reality of a cold-blooded killer. She had played hymns on Sunday mornings while secretly plotting her family's deaths. The betrayal of trust was complete. For investigators, the turning point remained the pastor's phone call. Without his tip, Sarah likely would have died. The deaths of Mark and Sean had slipped through unnoticed. Diane might have continued poisoning others, her crimes hidden under the mask of mysterious illness. The case forced hospitals and coroners to re-examine sudden family deaths, highlighting how easily poison can mimic natural causes. It also raised questions about complicity. Rachel Staude was both a daughter and a co-conspirator, caught in her mother's influence yet willingly helping commit unspeakable crimes. To this day, Diane remains behind bars, serving her life sentence. She rarely speaks publicly, offering no remorse and no apology. Rachel, imprisoned as well, faces the possibility of eventual release. Sarah, the survivor, bears the heaviest burden, living with both the physical scars of antifreeze poisoning and the emotional scars of knowing her own mother and sister tried to erase her. The story of Diane Staude is not one of sudden rage but of cold calculation. It is the story of a family systematically poisoned from within, a home turned toxic by resentment and betrayal. What looked like tragedy was, in truth, premeditated murder carried out with chilling patience. Amani Gabrielle Moss was born in 2003 in Georgia. Her early years held the same promise as any child's: school, play, and a chance at love. But behind suburban walls, her life became a nightmare. By the time she was 10, she was a prisoner in her own home, slowly starved to death by the woman who should have cared for her, Tiffany Moss. Her stepmother presented herself as a loving wife and mother to her own children. But to Amani, she was a tormentor. While her biological kids ate regular meals, Tiffany locked Amani away, withholding food until her body wasted. The little girl's once bright eyes dulled. Her frame shrank to skin and bone. When she died in 2013, she weighed just 32 pounds, the size of a toddler. Amani's father, Emin Moss, was complicit. He watched as his daughter grew frail, pleading for help. In one heartbreaking recording, Imani begged her father simply for food. He ignored her, allowing Tiffany's cruelty to continue. Instead of protecting his daughter, he chose silence and obedience. The horror escalated after Imani's death. Rather than call police, Tiffany and Emin stuffed her body into a trash can. They tried to burn the remains, hoping flames would erase the evidence of prolonged abuse. But neighbors noticed smoke, and soon authorities arrived. What they discovered was a crime scene of unimaginable cruelty, an innocent child's life reduced to ashes and neglect. The trial in 2019 revealed every gruesome detail. Prosecutors painted Tiffany Moss as calculated and indifferent. What shocked jurors most wasn't just the photos of Imani's skeletal remains, but Tiffany's chilling silence. Representing herself, she called no witnesses, mounted no defense, and showed no emotion. Even as prosecutors displayed images of her stepdaughter's emaciated body, Tiffany sat still, eyes cold, mouth shut. Emin Moss, facing his own charges, testified against her. He admitted his cowardice, admitting he watched his daughter starve and did nothing. He pleaded guilty to felony murder and received life in prison without parole. But Tiffany's trial became infamous for her unnerving indifference. She never argued, never explained, never sought mercy. Jurors had little doubt. After less than 3 hours of deliberation, they convicted Tiffany of malice murder, cruelty to children, and concealing a death. The sentence was death by lethal injection. Tiffany Moss became the only woman on Georgia's death row. The courtroom felt frozen as the verdict was read. Reporters noted her expression never changed. No tears, no anger, just silence. Prosecutors argued that her stillness was not shock or denial, but the truest reflection of her cruelty, indifference. At the heart of the case was Imani's stolen childhood. Teachers described a girl who once came to school cheerful but increasingly thin, tired, and withdrawn. Social workers had raised concerns before, but interventions were inconsistent. By the time authorities finally acted, Imani was already gone. The recording of her voice, pleading softly to her father for food, became the haunting centerpiece of the trial. It revealed both her suffering and her resilience. A child who still believed her father might save her, even as he failed her. Imani's short life and brutal death exposed cracks in the system. Why were warning signs overlooked? Why did neighbors, teachers, and agencies fail to save her? Each question deepened the tragedy. Prosecutors called the Moss home a house of horrors. The refrigerator was stocked, but Imani's plate stayed empty. The contrast was chilling. While Tiffany's children played and ate, Imani withered in isolation. Experts testified that starvation is among the most agonizing deaths. The body slowly consumes itself, muscle wasting, organs failing, pain intensifying with every passing day. For a 10-year-old, it was unthinkable cruelty. Emin's testimony revealed his own guilt and fear. He admitted Tiffany dominated the household, controlling decisions, silencing dissent. But prosecutors reminded jurors that fear does not excuse abandonment. A father chose his wife over his child, leaving Imani defenseless. When sentencing came, jurors spoke later about Tiffany's silence. They expected pleas for mercy or even signs of regret. Instead, her indifference sealed her fate. To them, she showed no humanity, no recognition of the child she destroyed. Her case remains one of the rare instances where a woman has been sentenced to death for crimes against a child. Advocates argue it underscores society's intolerance for caregivers who betray their most sacred duty. Others question whether death truly delivers justice, or simply ends another life without resolving systemic failures. For Imani, the chance to grow, laugh, and live freely was stolen. Her story now echoes as a warning about hidden abuse. Behind polished suburban walls, a child was erased by neglect, cruelty, and silence. In the years since the trial, Tiffany Moss has remained on death row, largely out of the public eye. She has filed no major appeals, spoken no words of remorse, and offered no explanations. Her quiet remains as haunting as the crime itself. Emin Moss serves his sentence in prison, where he will spend the rest of his life reflecting on the daughter he failed to save. His cowardice is remembered alongside Tiffany's cruelty, a dual betrayal that left a child defenseless. The tragedy of Imani Moss forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How do we recognize abuse when it hides in plain sight? What responsibility do fathers, neighbors, and institutions carry when a child is suffering? And when the ultimate betrayal comes from inside the home, how can society intervene before it's too late? For jurors, prosecutors, and the community, Tiffany's punishment was meant to be more than retribution. It was a declaration. A stepmother who starved a child to death, erased her from existence, and showed no remorse cannot escape accountability. Imani's voice remains. In a faint recording, her plea for food carries across time, reminding us of her stolen humanity. She was 10 years old, weighing only 32 pounds, yet her quiet words condemned the adults who failed her more powerfully than any witness. Her death was not just the result of one cruel woman, but of silence. From her father, from a household, and from systems meant to protect children. Silence killed her, and silence defined Tiffany Moss in court. Now Georgia's death row holds one woman whose crime is etched in history not for its complexity, but for its cruelty. Imani Moss's life ended in hunger and neglect. Tiffany Moss's fate is sealed in cold indifference, and the world is left remembering a little girl erased by the very people she called family. Lori Vallow's children, 16-year-old Caylee Ryan and 7-year-old Joshua J.J. Vallow, vanished in September 2019. Their disappearance was not reported for weeks, and when investigators finally began asking questions, Lori deflected. She told people her son was safe with relatives. She claimed her daughter was away at college. In reality, both children were already dead, victims of a twisted belief system fueled by their mother and her new lover. Lori was once described as radiant. A former beauty pageant contestant, a cheerleader type, a woman who lit up rooms. She married multiple times, raising children from different relationships. Outwardly, she was devoted. Inwardly, cracks were forming. Her obsession with religious prophecy grew after meeting Chad Daybell, a fringe author who claimed visions of the end times. Chad spoke of light and dark spirits, of zombies who could inhabit loved ones. To him, some bodies were beyond saving. The only way to free the soul was destruction. When Lori embraced Chad's teachings, her family became expendable. Her fourth husband, Charles Vallow, filed for divorce, warning that Lori believed herself a god preparing for the apocalypse. He feared for his life and for the children. In July 2019, Charles was shot dead by Lori's brother Alex Cox, in what was claimed to be self-defense. The case went no further at the time, but suspicion lingered. Months later, Chad's own wife, Tammy Daybell, died suddenly in her sleep. At first, her death was attributed to natural causes. Only later did investigators exhume her body and discover signs of asphyxiation. 2 spouses gone, 2 children missing, and Lori and Chad were already in Hawaii, smiling for cameras, seemingly carefree. While reporters pressed her on her children's whereabouts, Lori dodged. She offered no clarity, only smiles. She refused court orders to produce her kids. Her silence became more chilling than words. The truth emerged in June 2020. Acting on a search warrant, investigators dug into Chad Daybell's backyard in Idaho. There, they unearthed human remains. Caylee's body had been dismembered and burned, her identity confirmed only through DNA. JJ's small body was found wrapped tightly in black plastic and bound with tape. The discoveries shattered any illusions about Lori as a protective mother. The courtroom later heard the grotesque details. Texts between Lori and Chad referred to JJ as being possessed. Chad spoke of dark spirits overtaking the children. To them, killing their own kids was framed as salvation, an act to prepare for a prophesied new world. Prosecutors called it delusion, weaponized into murder. Caylee was described by friends as bright and independent, but increasingly withdrawn under Lori's control. JJ, diagnosed with autism, was known for his sweet nature and boundless energy. His grandparents begged authorities to check on him after he vanished. Their persistence drove the investigation forward, keeping pressure on Lori as she continued to evade. When Lori was arrested in Hawaii in early 2020, she appeared smiling, dressed neatly as though nothing was wrong. Her demeanor infuriated the public. Parents of missing children usually plead for help. Lori gave only smirks. The trial in 2023 laid bare a chilling narrative. Witnesses described Lori's growing devotion to Chad, her belief that she was chosen by God, and her willingness to remove anyone she saw as an obstacle. Jurors saw a mother who abandoned maternal instinct for fanatic delusion. The defense offered little sympathy, unable to explain away the bodies in Chad's yard or the callous texts about zombies. Prosecutors labeled her the doomsday mother. They argued she chose prophecy over parenthood, power over love. Evidence showed calculated planning, lies to family, shifting of money, and manipulation of followers who believed in Chad's visions. Each step brought her children closer to death. Forensic experts detailed the brutal manner of the murders. Caylee's remains, so damaged by fire and dismemberment, spoke to rage or an effort to obliterate evidence. JJ's suffocation, bound and discarded, revealed cold practicality. Both deaths contradicted Lori's smiling facade. The jury deliberated briefly. Lori Vallow Daybell was convicted of murder, conspiracy, and grand theft. Her sentence, life in prison without parole. Chad Daybell awaits trial, facing his own charges that mirror Lori's. The case became more than a murder trial. It was a study of how charisma and obsession can warp reality. Lori transformed from pageant queen and suburban mom to cult-like figure embracing visions of apocalypse. Her children became casualties of belief, sacrificed not for love, but for delusion. The community mourned Caylee and JJ as symbols of innocence betrayed. Memorials sprung up across Idaho and Arizona. Photos of the siblings, Caylee's teenage smile, JJ in his red sports jersey, stood in stark contrast to the grim reality of their final days. Family members voiced their devastation. JJ's grandparents, who had fought relentlessly for answers, wept openly in court. Caylee's friends remembered her laughter, cut short by her own mother's choices. The betrayal pierced deeper because it came from within the home. Psychologists examining the case note how dangerous charismatic figures can be. Chad Daybell offered Lori a grand destiny, convincing her that ordinary rules no longer applied. In that echo chamber, killing became framed as holy. The phenomenon echoes cult tragedies of the past, Jonestown, Waco, where blind belief justified death. But here, it was personal, maternal, and intimate. Lori Vallow Daybell's story is not just about murder. It is about transformation, how a mother became an executioner, how love became warped into ritualistic horror. Her case forces society to confront uncomfortable truths about faith gone astray, unchecked delusion, and the fragility of children caught in its grip. In prison, Lori remains defiant. Reports describe her as unrepentant, still convinced of her righteousness. For many, that refusal to face reality cements her legacy as the doomsday mother. Caylee and JJ's graves remind us of what was lost. They were children with futures, stolen not by strangers, but by the very person meant to shield them. Their tragedy lingers as a warning of what happens when obsession consumes compassion. Lori Vallow Daybell chose prophecy over parenthood, and in doing so, ensured her name will forever be linked with betrayal. The radiant mother, the smiling face, was only a mask. Beneath it lay delusion, destruction, and the quiet graves of her children.